course, I'm here to give you 40%, and a lot you have to do it on your own. And like I said, if you check on the calendar, I always share the lecture and exercises. That means immediately after the class, hoping into the notebook of the session that I will review the lecture and also attempt the question for the same. That is the only way you'll be able to recall. So I also believe all of you already have Anaconda installed, because that's the preferred software that we'll be using. And this is an open source platform. So just in case you have not been installed, there are two ways of going about it. It's good you also have a knowledge on how to install these things on your own. But if you find it's too early for you to get that, then just go to your portal and then request for support. And of course, you'll be sorted out with installation. I also want to, okay, I want to confirm the session so that it will be much easier for us to know what we have covered and where we are at the moment. So with the use of the introduction to Python, this is what will guide us on what to cover, but also the same session, you can be able to access them through your portal. So let me just see if whatever I'm saying is the correct thing. Okay. So if you go to content in your portal, you'll be able to see the areas that we are supposed to cover. Bernard, go ahead.
Hello, sorry. I was saying I have a feeling that you're presenting your screen, but I can't see it. Is it the case?
I'm presenting my screen. Maybe you can leave the meeting and then join again.
Oh, okay. Because there is
Cyprian,
nothing.
is that the case on your side? Just confirm with the Cyprian, maybe.
Mine is okay.
Oh, okay. Let me drop
Okay.
then, Jenna.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
it's visible. I can see.
Okay. Perfect. So let's talk about the content and the things you need to understand by the end of this program, because I'm also deliberate with what I'm giving you. We're not just coming here and say, hey, you can write codes here and there. If you have a picture of what it means to be a business intelligence analyst, then you'll also find the compass, or you'll be able to move around more easily. So what is the journey of a business intelligence analyst? You said you should be a person who should be able to extract data from a database, and that's why we've been doing the SQL. And then after you have extracted that data, you have to do some analysis. And for analysis, Python is the tool. After you have analyzed your data, you need to visualize, because when you go to these meetings or when you're reporting work, you're not going to walk in there with notebooks and codes, but people will prefer to see some sort of visualization. So I'm preparing you towards these 3 steps. And as much as I've introduced both language, or you already have a clue of SQL, and now we're introducing Python, at the end of the class, you should be the guy who can integrate all of these 3 softwares. Let's start with Python. What you need to learn. Of course, we will introduce you to Python and why Python, in as far as a language is concerned. And if you notice, or if you have been in my class since quantitative or the beginner session, I always talk about 2 programming languages. And for you to understand data science or unstructured data, you must know at least either of these languages, Python or R, and a knowledge of both will give you an upper hand even with your own learning, so that you'll be able to know what's the difference between each platform that you're using. So I will be introducing Python, talk about variables and data types. After the variables and data types, we need to understand about so here we'll talk about arithmetic operator, we have logical operator, we have comparison operators. What types of variable are there? And can you play around with those different types? And then we need to look at it. And of course, the basic function is the ones that come with the infrastructure. And a good example is function like print, count, and so forth. So they are the functions that you don't necessarily need to have to create them as a user, but they come inbuilt, just like the way you jump into Excel. You want to do average, you can just write their average. Those functions are the ones which came with the first the functions that comes with the infrastructure, and we will also have to define our own function. That means you can create something that suits your need. With the function, we have 2 of them. You can either create a function without a parameter, and you'll also look at having function with a parameter. Apart from defining functions, we need to understand now, again, with how we store our variables or objects. And here we look at the different types of how to store our data. Are we talking about are we talking about tuples or dictionaries? And with the T, we'll also see how do you play around with it. Of course, remember, this level we're still understanding the language. The goal is just getting comfortable with the language. After all that, then we'll say we are good to go to analysis. And with analysis, this is where now I'll have to bring in statistics to marry what you have learned with the language, because the language is just a tool to derive, to take you somewhere. But now you have to bring in the principle of statistics or statistical concept to now make sense out of our data. If statements, this is where you just familiarize yourself with logic. And of course, this level is all about logic. Does something make sense? And if something makes sense, what are the outcomes? Have. And based on what we have, one, we need to understand what is this thing called Python and programming and so forth. And there are some few terminologies that we need to know. One, you need to know what's a code. And I think that's the most basic part I can ever start. What is a code? And then from code, you need to understand what is a program. From program, you can have now a programming language. You also need to know who's a programmer. And then we can say what is a system. Let's go step by step. So say we need to understand what's a code. From a code, we will understand a program. From a program, we will know who is a programmer, and then we'll also understand what is programming language. Let's start with the code. A code can be defined as an instruction, and this instruction is instruction that the software can be able to understand. We can break down codes into two, and the code can either be a command or a comment. And the difference here is when you talk about a command, that means these are instructions that the software can be able to read, understand, and it will return something back to you. That means there'll be some sort of output. When you talk about comments, these are instructions that the software can be able to understand because they're codes, but it's not necessarily supposed to return anything to you, either an output or an error. So if you're not getting an error, then it means the software understands what you're talking about. Okay. Now, how does the software differentiate between a command and a comment? So in Python, we will use hashtag. So for you to write a comment, you will start with an hashtag. I think it's the same as stata. I think in stata we use, no. I think in R, because stata we are using star in your log files. Here, if you want to write a comment, you will use hashtag. For commands, all you have to do is just write. You don't have to start with anything, but you will be able to see how all the things came into play. So when you have several codes, when you have several codes, of course, when you execute these codes, the software will be able to understand, and if it understands, it can either return an output or it doesn't return an output. Okay. So when you have several lines of code which tend to perform the same function, then we refer to that as a program. And here we've said what? A program is basically a sequence of instructions that designate how to execute a computation. So you have to do something, and the software understands what you're doing. So all those codes, when you run them, you now say you've created a program. Now, when that program is meant to solve an issue, then you can say, I have a system, because now it comprises of integrated parts of a program. So it makes up a system. And how do you create a program? You will create a program using a language, because the essence here is you're just communicating with your machine. So how will you communicate with your computer? You will communicate with your computer using a language. And this language are the one we refer as programming language. In the field of data science, machine learning, and business intelligence, our most preferred softwares are now, our most preferred language is on R for analysis. SQL is now the language you use for extracting data or to query data. And then, like I said, Tableau, of course, not a language, but we'll also see how we can integrate all that. The person who now is involved in creating programs using a programming language is the one who refer to them as a programmer. So if you're here in this class and you envision yourself as the person who will be creating programs, now you can call yourself a programmer. And a programmer uses any programming language. Why Python? Of course, we have had this conversation for so long we have those who are pro Python, we have those who are pro R, but I'm not here to escalate that debate, but there are three reasons why we're using Python in this class or for this course. One, Python is a general purpose. That means it's a free software. You can say Python is an open source, which means it's a free software. You don't have to pay for you to use. Opposed to things like SPSS, data, as much as I'm sure most of you pay for you to use those software in our classes. But when you go out there, you'll realize that you'll be required to pay for the license. As you can see, we're now with the environment of this organization, it's much more costly to the analyst salary and also pay the license for that analyst to use a certain platform. So if you are the analyst who can use the platform which the organization doesn't necessarily need to pay for it, then it will be much easier for that organization to hire such a person, or you can say you'll now be in demand because you're cost effective. I hope this makes sense. Excuse me. On general purpose, we said Python is not just for data science. You let me know in case my audio is not that good, or if I lose you somewhere. Be in communication with me so that I don't leave anyone behind. So I was talking about high level, and I said with high level, it's much easier for you to work with Python as a because it's closer to a human logic. And what it means here is, assuming you even want to create a variable x, all you have to do is just equate x with that an element that you want to have. It's not like other languages whereby you can say, you need to create assignment functions and so forth. Okay. Now, I'm now sharing my screen, so you should be back to seeing something. So we can say Python properly lies on two main pillars. And one, we are emphasizing that Python is easy to learn in as far as the language is concerned. So let's go to the interface that we're going to use to now learn this language called Python. And we have two main platforms. I don't know for programmers or for people who are into coming up with programs, but for us in this class, we'll be using the Jupyter interface or Jupyter app to write our codes. And where are we going to get this Jupyter? So if you go to your browser and just Google Anaconda, I emphasize with this one, you can do it yourself or you can involve our technician to help you. But for me, I prefer my student to know how to handle things like software installation. So if you go to Anaconda individual download, you will see there's the Anaconda distribution whereby you can be able to download either for Windows, for Mac, or for Linux. But of course, if you're using Windows, then this is where you go for. And if you opt for 64-bit, I think 64-bit is universal with all the software, all the machines. I don't know. I think no, 32-bit is what is compatible. Apologies for that. So a 32-bit software can be installed in a 64-bit, and most of you, I'm sure you're having 64 bits. You'll notice that by the times 86 in your program file. But once you download, of course, with the installation, just proceed with next all the way to the end. It's a simple process, and you should be having Anaconda with you. So let me just open the install that I have. For those who already have the software installed, just open up. For those who are yet to, I think Cyprian, you're one of them. You can just observe, and then after the class, go ahead and install. In case you'll face any challenges, you can always sort for support. Now, why are we talking about Jupyter? So Anaconda, of course, is a platform. It's still open source, and we talked about a huge community that supports Python as a language. And where do you get that community? In a platform called Anaconda. And if you install and open your Anaconda, you realize that you don't just have one platform, but you have several. It's a kernel. And with this tool, you will see that you can have the R Studio, which is basically the infrastructure that you will use to write R language. And then, of course, I'll leave you to interact with the rest. But for me, I'm much more concerned here. If you launch it, you realize now your browser will open up. And this is where we talk about the client user server. Okay. What does that mean? One, for Jupyter to operate, of course, remember we said we have two platforms that you can use. If you have other ones, feel free to inform us. Of course, I know they're there, but we have Jupyter and Google Colab. Google Colab is a product of Google. And what it means here is if you write your codes in a Google Colab, you'll be able to store your notebooks in your drive. But the only thing is, for you to use Google Colab, you must be connected to the internet. So if you just write Google Colab or Google Colaboratory, okay? So I said, if you go to Google Colab, you'll be able to access a notebook, just like the way we will be. Let me just open one. I think it's already behaving. So I'll just open a new notebook. So all of them, I'm using my browser to access it. And I said Google Colab, Google platform, but you need to be connected to the internet. And every time you execute your code, you can be able to save these folder, so these notebooks in your drive, the same way you use any Google Drive product. I'm sure this is not a new thing. For us in this class, I don't want us to be really dependent on having internet, and that is why we will be using the Jupyter. And like I said, Jupyter is not something that you install, or is not a software that you have it. Instead, it uses what we call a user client server, which basically means when you launch Jupyter, your browser will open up with a tab, and that tab is like what you're seeing here. And this is where now you'll be able to write your codes. And you don't need to be connected to the internet for this browser to be functioning. The most important part that I want you to focus on is on how to upload a notebook and how to start a new notebook file. So all the notebooks that I've shared in your email sharing with you, all you have to do is go and upload. So you will download it, save it somewhere in your computer. To access them, go to upload. That means you're uploading something that has been shared. I hope we are clear up to that point. If you're starting a new notebook, you just want to write your own code, here with Python from new note Python. Okay, I think you can clarify that as you move. But if you're into Python 2, I can be sharing notebook files as both. Of course, I can share both Python 2 and Python 3. But there's no sharing both of them if there's no one who's into Python 2, and I don't want to confuse anyone. So why okay, of course, Python has been here for a while, and there's some improvement. So there's no big deal about Python 2 and Python 3. So as you understand one of them, you're good to go. And as far as I'm here, of course, Python 3 is the latest version or the latest part of it. So we'll be biased towards Python 3. But if you're the old school guy, still there's no ARM, we can still share there. I can still own myself with the language. So Jupyter kernel, and that's the same. So if you had to print hello world, so I can just world. Of course, you can't learn any language without saying hello to the world. It's a new step. So as you see, I can make code in the Google Colab, and if I go to the Jupyter, still have my code. For you, fun. You can be juggling between the two, be able to work with it. So let's move. I think we're into Jupyter. We've talked about how to upload a new file, so I think you can just do these things practical. There's no point of me preaching with how to upload and new, so you're comfortable with that. As you can see with the how I've just my code. So within this cell, this way will be, and when you see green in color, then it means that line is active. And you see blue in color, you will realize that that cell is not active at that time. Of course, we will figure out this as we move on. Now let's talk about how to execute your code, whether it's a comment or a command. And I'll use an example, the one print hello world. There are two ways of going about it. If I use Control Enter, you realize that you will execute that, but have a new whereby you can writing your code. So, for instance, if I say print world, you realize I see here hello world, But if I want to write another code or another line of command, I cannot be able to do that. So that's not a good way of you executing a line of code, because you will always need to have a way of writing. So we prefer shift enter, and with shift enter, you'll execute the same code and the new cell will open up. So this new cell is the one continue with the executing a code. As you can see, I'm able to proceed with whatever I want. Let's talk about now what are variables. Depending with your level, in the beginner's class, we define variables as attributes or characteristics that there's a researcher who's interested to understand. And in that space, our scope was more of primary sources and secondary sources. And with both primary and secondary sources, we were biased with what we called and adjusting your mindset so that you should know what's the difference between unstructured data and unstructured data. Are you dealing with a data frame or arrays, one-dimensional and two-dimensional? Viewing thing is when now we realize, oh, what now is this thing we call variable at this level, and what is this thing called objects? Because there's a clear difference between the two. Now let's define a variable at this. And because say variables are more like container. Okay, so one of the main concepts of programming is variables, and of course they're your best friends because most will be creating objects and variables here and there. And at this level, I just want to say, don't envision it as attributes of population. I want you to vision it as a store, a platform where you can store or some data input. So for instance, when you say x is equals to 5, then it means your variable is x, that's the object you have created, and the element is 5. So x is just meant to accommodate or to hold the element 5 for you. Okay, I hope that is straightforward. And how do you create variable? Like I said, this is the most easiest language towards human logic. So if you just use the equal sign, at this level, equal sign is the assignment function. So you just say, I'm creating an object. And let's see how to differentiate between a comment and a command. So we said it's good you always comment before you write any command. And the role of comment is basically to inform either you or another person will come to, and they'll be able to know what this code was all about. So if you're creating variable, so creating variables, and he said create a variable in Python is simple. Just create a variable x, and if you use an equal sign, you can assign any element to that variable. You need also to call that variable so that you can be able to see what you've created. So don't expect if you just say x is equals to 5, the software will display for you what that element is. So if you want to see what you have created, you have to call it. And if you notice, I've just created an element 5, which is contained in an object called x. And this time, if I call it, you'll notice that I'm getting an error. Maybe I pose a question. Who can tell me why I'm error? I think in most of the class, we should be starting getting comfortable with fixing errors. What do you think is that error? What am I missing out? Anyone can try? If you want to say,
Yes, George.
just raise your hand or write on the comment section. Or okay, Polycarp, you can go ahead.
Yeah, because you defined it with the X in a small letter, but you called it in a capital letter. So Python does not recognize, is not able to recognize between X and X small and X capital as the same thing. So that's where the error is.
Perfect. I think you cannot ignore that a small letter X and cap same thing. And what Polycarp is explaining is I've defined X here with lowercase x, but when I'm going to call it, I'm calling it with capital X, and that's why error which says what the name X is not defined. So most of the time, the content of your error so that you go and fix it. You can reason on the solution on the same. Now we know what's variables. Let's talk about variable types. And majorly, we have two types, and we covered these in the quantitative analysis. We talked about numerical and strings. And for numerical, we say all those data that the observation or the inputs you're getting, if they're in numbers, then that object will qualify as a numeric. Okay. And then we said if the inputs you're getting from your object or your variables, because I hope I'm not confusing by jumping into objects and variables. I believe you're all making sense. We're all on the same page with what I'm talking about. So when the answers are in alphabetic character, then we say that object is a string object. So let's start there. You know what is a numeric and you know what is a string. Now, when you go to numeric, we can say, we don't just say numeric and they leave it like that, but we can talk about integers, floating points, and then booleans. So integers contain all the all numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 9. And Boolean values, there's unless there's a question or concern. Okay, I'm sharing back my screen. You should be able to see. And we talk about operators. I said we have what you call the arithmetic operators. We have comparison operator, and then we have logic operator. Okay, so let me go back to content. So far we are at operators, and for operator you say we have logic, arithmetic, and comparison. Arithmetic operators, this is now when you say you can also perform basic math, or you can perform mathematical concept using Python. So if you want to do 1 plus 2, Python can do that. But again, it depends what is basic math. It is on the use of the percentage sign and the double equal sign. I think those are the new operators. So for sign, of course, it returns the remainder. You do 16 by 3. There's a 1. I think in Python, if you execute by 3, it's 5. Okay, the remainder. But if you want now to get the quotient, now you say use the percentage sign. So 16 divided by 3, of course, you're expecting to get quotient which is 1. Sorry, the remainder which is 1. I hope that is straightforward. When using double equals means you're raising something to the power. So if you say 2 raised to power 2, then it's just like saying 2 squared. 2 raised to power 3, and so forth. So, of course, in an event that you're dealing with that, you can also perform basic math tests to jog now your memory. Let's talk about double equality sign and how it applies in the language. And we said when you're using equal sign in Python, it's an assignment function. So you're saying let the value of x have an element 5. But when you're using double equal sign, then it means you're going to do what you call you're comparing, you're doing a comparison. So the equal sign when in programming, of course, I said it's an assignment function, or it binds something. And when you mean equality, it means, I think we even use this in Stata. And you said analyze the average, analyze maybe what do you call it? We analyze the wage only if the only if the race equal to. Let me relate with that example so that you can dive into your Stata class and do a recap on the same. So you're saying analyze wage, which is there, but you're not analyzing wage for everyone, but you're analyzing wage for only people who are blacks. And you said, how are blacks coded? Blacks were coded with a value of 2. And there we had to say what? Summary for wage race equal 2. That means you're equating if the race of a person is the same as 2. So that's the same concept here. And we'll see how that works, especially when we're introducing if statements. I think we'll dwell with the if statement on that. But just know with 1 equal sign, you are assigning something. With double equal sign, you're comparing something. On reassigned values, this is where we say Python is also good with holding on to variables. So what it means, if you decide to create a variable or an object and you call it Z, assign an element 1 to that object Z, and then after some few lines of code, you decide to again create the same variable Z, but this time you assign a different element, let's say the value of 3, the software will always respond to the immediate former element that you have assigned. So you should be careful with how you create your objects. I think as opposed to other platforms, you're always prompted. For instance, in SPSS, if you have already a variable called gender, and then you're creating another one, you'll be prompted that variable gender already exists. Do you want to replace, or do you want to create another one? But that kind of prompt doesn't happen in Python. So once you reassign a value to a certain object, that is what your software will be able to recall. Of course, to add comments, we said with the use of comments, hashtag is the most preferred. So just introduce hashtag and the software will know that whatever you're dealing with is a comment and not a command. Online continuation, if you use a backward slash, so I think this one is much straightforward. Just like you have a very long text and you want to split it, just use the backward slash. I really don't want to talk about line continuation, but these are things you can be able to read and understand. Let's talk about indexing. And to index means to identify. That's why in school, most of you guys were given some sort of index number. That was meant to identify you as a student. What position are you? So how do you count, or how do you identify things in Python or elements? First, you need to know the logic or the rules of counting in Python. And for instance, if you have, let's say, a word or a string like Friday, you can be able to locate elements of that object or whatever text you have. And if you're counting from the left side, so with Python, you start counting from 0. Okay, so 0, 1, all the way to 9. When you start counting from the right side, then you start counting using -1. Let me use an example. I have Friday, and with Friday, if I want to locate D, then so I'm introducing again the difference between braces, parentheses, and how applied, or what are the roles of each of them. Is brackets, and square brackets are meant for actually two things, and also to create a list. Okay, take this. When you're using brackets, this is when you are either creating a list. That means the elements of a list, you can be able to make changes to it. You can play around. I think I'll be teaching that when we introduce methods. So we say, can you append or extend a list? And you can only do that by use of the position of an element. And if I write here -1, software tells for me why. Why is the first element from the right? If I write there, this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I just write there 5, I should expect to get the results, which is so depending with where you're coming from. But if I write here 0, the software to return F, which is the first element from my left. So just remember how we do counting or indexing, and also parentheses. Just in a nutshell, parentheses are meant to repeat parentheses, tuples, brackets, list, braces, dictionary. Now, we'll also need to understand what we call indentation. And I think with indentation, this is where you are creating blocks. And because of that, let me pause it there so that I understand my audience. So majority of you, I can see the students that I've been with, the Anthony, Bernard, and Polycarp. I know you guys are the senior members. So you will bear Vic and Cyprian. You have no choice but to tighten your belts. You have to catch up with the rest. So whatever I've been able to cover all the way up to structure your code with the indentation, I'm giving you tonight to review all the code up to this level. Tomorrow, I will pick it from there, and I will start with comparison operator going towards now introduction to list and so forth. For those who don't have software, like I said, you can download Anaconda yourself, which I prefer or I highly recommend, so that you know how to install your softwares. Otherwise, send your AnyDisk number. Just go to support. If you go to your portal, and I've also noticed some of you are still facing challenge operating the portal. But nonetheless, if you go to your portal, there's an option of support. And for support, you can either request for support on the course or the use of the platform. So in an event that you're struggling with accessing things like your certificate and so forth, you know those are platform challenges. So you'll request support for that. For class support, you can now send your AnyDisk number, and admin will be able to respond and sort you out. Let me take questions or concerns before I leave you.
Yes, just to, hello, George.
Hello, Polycarp, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Yes, are we continuing with the SQL class?
Yes. I want, like I said, I think the other time, I want us to be all together so that it's much easier for me. Instead of teaching Python at 6 p.m. and again SQL at 7, how about I just take you through the Python, because all of you are supposed to do Python, and then we merge now at the time whereby we need to do integration. So we have, in the course of this week, hopefully I should finish up on the language, and I introduce some descriptive and inferential analysis. For analysis, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, because at that level, what is descriptive, you already know what is inferential analysis. You already know how to interpret those results. So I'll just be showing you maybe with the context of employee data. So there's that data set that we are using in SQL. Okay, so we'll be able to download some of the CSV file from our server. Also, we'll also be analyzing some data from our database using our Python. I think that's the goal and why I'm delaying with the Python. Sorry, with SQL. But as much as you're not covering that thing, trust me, if I come back and I ask you the difference between where and return, I think it can tip you off. So make sure you keep on relate with those things like select, group by, sort by. They're simple code functions, but when you put it in a context of a data set, that's when things starts to be in a different way. So spend your time to jog your mindset to understand logic, so that when we combine the two softwares, you should be good to go. But don't miss class. So we're going to have class the whole of this week. Continuous, don't miss any session.
Okay, every day?
Yes, so yeah, let's see what we're going to cover by Wednesday. And if I'll still have energy and time, I can ask for some makeup class, maybe Thursday and Friday.
Okay.
Just to note also, we have I think Bernard is already comfortable with some of the things that I talk about. And there's nothing good as peer-to-peer learning. So in an event that maybe I'm not in, don't let that day to go into waste. You guys can just, in a class, do some, and then if it's something that maybe you will need my input, when I'm back, we can always discuss together.
Okay.
I think on the PDF, I'm trying to make sure we also have some sort of organization. This PDF, you can download it from, it's here. I think it's here on your portal. If you just go to download, you can be able to download PDFs from your student portal. Also, the same I'll be sharing in your email. So both sides, keep checking on the files. If there's no any other concern or question, then let's meet tomorrow, same time, and we pick it